We can report the feds are moving forward on two fronts. The first is in the Michael Cohen case in New York, and the other is based on new information we've obtained here on the beat from the Mueller probe itself, and I'm about to report it for the first time. We begin with what appears bigger, the Michael Cohen case. The feds now, as of this hour, have access to everything that they can legally use that they seized in the now famous FBI raid on Michael Cohen back in April. This is important because, as you may have heard for months, there has been a process where an independent lawyer reviews all of the material, the documents, the files, the famous tapes, and figures out what's off limits. Tonight, for the first time, that review is done. We can tell you that. And it means the feds can use everything that they have that hasn't been declared privileged through that process. This brings them much closer to what they do next. If they find a bunch of material that, for example, could clear Michael Cohen, well, they would go forward in that direction. That's not what legal experts expect. Even Michael Cohen has talked about cooperation, which implicates this material. It suggests that now that this process is over, that they move forward with what they found in the raid, that Michael Cohen could alternatively face potential charges based on that evidence. So that's number one. We bring that to you as the first news. The other breaking news I can report exclusively, which is that we've learned Special Counsel Bob Mueller has informed radio host and political activist Randy Credico, who's known for his past history and relationship with both Roger Stone and Julian Assange. Mueller has indicated that his office does intend to subpoena him to force an interview. We here at The Beat confirm this from a direct source with knowledge of the special counsel's outreach to Randy Credico's attorney. That is brand new. If you watch this show and our reporting, some of this may be familiar because Credico was on this show last night and he explained the lead up to all this. He said publicly for the first time that he declined a request to participate in a voluntary interview that was made as a request when federal agents working for Mueller approached him in New York. Has Bob Mueller called you in to testify?
They did. They actually didn't call me in. They actually showed up and they asked me to come in and do a personal voluntary interview, which I did not.
Who is they that showed up?
Somebody from his investigation. They asked my lawyer if I would like to go down and do a voluntary interview, and he said no. You know, I didn't get a subpoena. They asked me for a voluntary interview.
That was the news last night. The news right now is that Mueller, according to our reporting, has now, since the interview aired, reached out and said they do intend to subpoena Mr. Credico. They want to talk to him. Now, we don't know for a fact what they intend to talk to him about, but we have a pretty good idea of how he fits into this case. Number one, Credico is involved in an area of investigative interest because of his repeated contact publicly with Julian Assange. And then number two, something we also discussed in our interview, Credico has a long-time political history with Roger Stone. Again, that doesn't mean we've confirmed the topics of the interview, and Mueller's office doesn't release that in advance, but we do have new information about a new person that they want to subpoena for an interview. With that, I turn to our guest tonight, Christina Greer, professor at Fordham University, and we're joined by two former federal prosecutors, John Flannery and Glenn Kirschner. John, starting with you, what does it tell you that, as is so often the case in Trump land, the lawyers are on TV, the lawyers were discussing their deliberations with each other on one of their radio shows. Last night, this witness who's got ties, as I've reported, Randy Credico, discussed his history in the probe, and after that interview aired, we learned tonight, we're reporting it here exclusively for the first time, that the office reached out after the interview and does want to subpoena him.
Well, I think Rudy's run out of tricks, and it's pretty bad when they have to be in an echo chamber in which the two of them, who are lawyers representing Trump, have to speak to each other as if they're having a distant organization conversation. Attacking Mueller and saying what he's doing is wrong by Rudy Giuliani is really upside down. Giuliani was the Genghis Khan of prosecutors, and now Mueller, who is a by-the-book prosecutor who doesn't reveal what he's doing except in indictments and pleas and trials, he's being criticized by Rudy. I think that they're desperate.
And let me direct you. Also, what do you think Mueller wants to subpoena Randy Credico? He sent these agents to New York. Now he wants to subpoena him. Why is that of interest?
I think he's trying to close the circle around Roger Stone, anything he can have. And since Credico had access, as you noted, both to Assange and to Roger Stone, that's an obvious line of questioning, I think. And he wants to see what he has. And I think that he probably will get something, because the arrogance of these participants is amazing. What they say to each other that inculpates them and links what one did with the other. So it also suggests that Roger Stone is perhaps in the batter's box with maybe Trump Jr. and several other people.
Well, you're
And I
using
don't
a
think that's
fancy
gonna-
word, as you often do, inculpate being a fancy word for makes them look really suspicious and guilty. Glenn, on the same point, let me play for you the way that Mr. Credico publicly tried, as so many witnesses have done lately, tried to limit his exposure to other people who could figure in as subjects or targets. This was last night on the subject of Mr. Roger Stone. Take a look. And you're in there as an associate, and I'm not implying anything negative about you, but as a known associate of Roger Stone and Julian
Well, don't say
Assange.
associate of Stone. I know Stone.
What word would you use?
I would say someone that has worked with Stone before, but not an associate.
A former colleague?
No, I've worked on a campaign or two with Roger Stone in the past.
former
I've known him
campaign colleague?
16 years I've known the guy.
Okay. I mean, it sounds like you're going up from associate, not down. Glenn?
So, Ari, let me say something that you might not hear a lot of people say, but this is probably a good thing for Randy Credico that he's been subpoenaed. Why do I say that? Because if he were a target of the investigation, it's very unlikely that Bob Mueller would subpoena him, because there's a Department of Justice policy that says I was a prosecutor for 30 years, we don't subpoena targets of the investigation. Why? Because they have a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. So we don't hand them a subpoena, which is a court order, force them to testify before the grand jury and incriminate themselves. So what we do, though, as prosecutors, is we invite targets in for voluntary interviews because they're not compelled to appear. So we're not placing their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination in jeopardy. So I think in a strange way, Randy Credico may count himself lucky that he's been subpoenaed.
John Flannery disagrees so much that he could barely listen to your answer. I got to get around the horn. So, John, briefly, your rebuttal.
Well, my rebuttal briefly is all you have to do is tell them that they're a target, and therefore they have sufficient information to indict the person. And once they know that, they still can decide to go in or not. And the Fifth Amendment is not limited to targets. Anybody, including Mr. Trump, instead of this dance he's going through, he could say, I'm going to take the Fifth. He just doesn't take it for political reasons. So if a person is known to be a target and he's told he's a target, that's the end of the obligation of justice. And these interviews are a mistake, in my opinion, but that's the Southern District of New York method, or it was when I was there.
Well, I'm going to let Glenn get back in a minute, but Christina, I want to play Roger Stone, who, according to Glenn's analysis, would look to be in a more difficult spot, because unlike what we're reporting tonight about Credico, according to Stone and his lawyers, he has not been asked for an interview, which makes it look more like he could be a target, and he is pushing back. Here he was in an interview last night.
I'm also mindful of any prosecutor's ability to squeeze underlings to get them to compose testimony against a bigger fish. I have not been contacted by the special counsel's office. I've made it abundantly clear that there's no circumstances under which I would testify against the president. I would not rule out cooperating if they think I can be helpful.
So this is not the president's first rodeo when it comes to lawyers and depositions, and it's clearly not Roger Stone's either. But this one feels different, and you can tell that they're sensing that something is off, right? As long as Rudy Giuliani was in the Southern District and he prosecuted lots of mobsters, we're not dealing with mobsters per se. We're not dealing with real estate agents in Queens. What the president is going to try to do is make himself the hero and the victim, as he's been doing.
Dorothy, we're not in Queens anymore?
We are not in Queens anymore, okay? So we're in the big leagues, and this is something that the president doesn't understand. So as he's been a grifter and a snake oil salesman for his entire career, he's realizing that this last grift may have been a bridge too far. And so Mueller has been systematic, methodical, and as our previous guests have said, he's being very strategic. We've seen also in the past few years oftentimes the way to get to the biggest fish is to go through their son as well. We're seeing it with Collins. We've seen it with Shelley Silver in New York. We've seen it several times. And so I think the president, as much as he's trying to win in the court of public opinion, and he has a solid base, and obviously this is great red meat to say, look at these Democrats, look at these liberals, they're sort of going after me for something that, is intangible, and, we haven't done anything wrong, or maybe if we did, it's not that big of a deal, right? The goalpost keeps changing. It's highly problematic because you're seeing the president get a little more nervous. Obviously, these 6 a.m. tweets, these midnight tweets, the fact that this witch hunt keeps coming up in his desperation pretty soon. And so I think what a lot of Americans fear is that in his efforts to self-preserve himself, he might engage us in certain international affairs that would harm the entire nation and or world.
Well, and that goes to the stress. And Glenn, General McCaffrey is joining us later tonight. He says he doesn't think Donald Trump has ever operated under this level of stress, and that can account for things that are actually quite scary. To Christina's point, the Associated Press and other publications have talked about the concern about Don Jr. Trump watching the courtroom proceedings and fearing that Donald Trump Jr. could at some point be the one on trial. And Glenn, only Donald Trump and to some extent perhaps his closest family members know what they did and whether that's a trial that would end in exoneration or something else.
Yeah, Ari, I read the New York Times article today with great interest, and it does seem like the insiders are reporting that the president is really stewing and steaming and very concerned about the exposure that Don Jr. might have. And listen, nobody's going to make light of that because, as parents, we can understand that we are concerned for our children and we want the best for them. I do think that the president, however, may also find himself someday as a co-defendant with his son at defense counsel table. Now, I don't know if Bob Mueller will...
You think that would be before or after the term of his presidency?
Well, Ari, I don't know that Bob Mueller will take the narrow path to indicting a president that I think is arguably available. He would have to seek an exception to the OLC memo that sets out as a policy matter that the Department of Justice doesn't believe a sitting president can be indicted.
You're saying something significant, and you're saying it as a legal matter. I mean, I take your analysis to be not that you don't like Donald Trump or you disagree with his policies, but as a very seasoned federal prosecutor, you believe there is potential joint legal criminal exposure for him and his son.
I do, and a pathway to get there even while he's sitting. But Bob Mueller might not want to go near that third rail. Instead, he might split the baby. He might return co-conspirator indictments against the others for whom he has found sufficient evidence of criminality, and maybe just author a report to Congress about his findings concerning any potential criminal conduct by the president. Or, as we've all seen done before, albeit back in 1974, he could also include the president in a conspiracy indictment as an unindicted co-conspirator.
Let me get John in. Take a quick listen, John, to Rudy Giuliani's argument that you don't need an interview if you already know the answers here.
Right.
He knows the answers to every question that he wants to ask. He's going to ask him, did you tell Comey to go easy on Flynn? The president's going to say, no, I didn't. Hey, Bob, you know it. Why do you want to get him under oath? You think we're fools? You want to get him under oath because you want to trap him into perjury. Well, we're not going to let you do that.
And John, this is an old a Southern argument. They call it a kind of a trap house argument for perjury trapping the president.
Yeah, there's a big flaw there, which is he's saying, he's in a way admitting that what Trump's going to say is a lie. He's saying that if he says, oh, I didn't tell him that, putting him at conflict under oath as opposed to talking to the media, that would be perjury. Well, so why shouldn't he be prosecuted for perjury? It's not a trap. And the same thing, why don't we ask him, he put his own son at risk by telling that story that he wrote about, oh, they were just talking about adoption. Right. He's put his son at risk by telling that lie, perhaps convincing his son to do it. So I have crocodile tears for how he cares about his son. If he cared about his son, he would have never put him in that position in the first place.
Crocodile tears in the trap house. We have, Christina, keep it together, please. It's a serious news program.
Well, Listen, I mean, we also know that this is a man who's a pathological liar, right? We know that he lies about the number of floors on his apartments. We know that he lies about how much he spent to build, said building. He lies about how many tenants he has. I mean, this is someone who should never be under oath, right? And we've seen sort of snippets of his depositions where he can't answer questions because he doesn't have his glasses, or he hasn't read it, or he's just flipping through pages and he's stalling.
Which suggests he knows how much he's lying because he gets careful when he's under heat. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.